Hey everybody, welcome to Conversations. Thanks for joining us as we continue to talk about how to follow the way of Jesus in everyday life. We just had a great time recording our Mother's Day conversation. We hope that you enjoyed that this past weekend, and we're just continuing the conversation. To be honest, we only got about halfway through our little scripted questions, and so there's more questions here that we want to be able to answer for you, and just to speak into what it really looks like to become better as we follow the way of Jesus in this season of pandemic. And so I'll just kind of start off where we left off here, and we just kind of dive from there.
So if time permits, though, can we have Micah and Shireen dance a little bit together?
Nope.
Because...
Really? Come on.
Unless it's after a wedding, it's not happening.
Whoa. Well, Mother's Day doesn't matter, does it?
I guess not.
I'm keeping it special.
That's good.
Rare is
Good
special.
to know.
He can dance, by the way. You need to know.
He can.
Blake and Mackenzie's wedding, one of our...
That's it.
That was fun.
Yeah.
It
was
was
great.
a lot of fun.
It was great. So let's just pick up here, Shireen. What demands of motherhood have you begun to see differently as you've moved from being exhausted to being fulfilled? I know just because I live with you that this whole idea of following Jesus early on in motherhood was pretty overwhelming. How do I continue to follow Jesus in the way that I did in my 20s? But I've also seen you move from exhausted to fulfilled in certain areas of your life. What are some of the ways that you've navigated that?
I think I shared that verse in Romans 12 in the Message version that really kind of helped me change the way I think about just the ordinary of our lives. I think for me it was just that complete shift of thinking of, okay, picking up toys in my living room with little kids, or taking them to the park, or pushing them on a swing, or reading a book to them, or cooking dinner for my family. Like all these tasks that for me, I needed to feel like I accomplished something similar to you, and it's just every day is the same thing. And so you can start to feel like this is not worthy of worship, an offering of worship to the Lord, and how is this anything for him? But just that changing of my mindset of, no, these are the things that he is so pleased with, and these are acts of worship for him. It really was, it's a choice. It was a choice every single day. I'm sure you experienced the same thing. And so some of it was just shifting my mindset. Some of it was still, and you and I worked it out too, finally figuring it out how to do it. Okay, when you come home from work, I need a break. I need a break. Whether it's just, I'm going to go grocery shopping by myself, and on that car ride, I put on worship music, or I drive in silence. Many times I drove in silence, so I didn't have to hear any noises or anyone calling my name, and just having that time to commune with Jesus, even if it was, like I said, just cries for help. But I think we had to work that out too. You had to help recognize that in me and help me find that. I think another huge piece for me was our group. You invited me into that group when I was a young mom and didn't know how to do anything. And being around other moms either ahead of me or, in that same season, and just being filled with that and being encouraged, like, no, the work you're doing is, Jesus sees it, it's worship to him. It doesn't take away, like in my mind, the difference between I'm praying for this amount of time versus all I do is feed people and change diapers and pick up my house and break up fights. And just y'all helped me see that differently, you and several other moms that shaped me in that season. I think that's an important thing for women too, to always have someone ahead of them speaking into their lives, and I think that's important. That helped me change to being fulfilled. I know you noticed that as well.
I did, yeah.
It sounds like in a lot of what you're saying, I know for years this was my mindset. This is spiritual, this is not.
Yes.
But it sounds like you're saying everything is spiritual or has the potential.
Yeah.
I feel like if the earlier you can have the understanding that everything you do can be an act of worship. And I used to be like, all I do all day is the same thing.
Yeah.
Well, then I read this book, The Quotidian Mysteries by Kathleen Norris. And she was just saying how it's the the repetitive things that we do over and over that we think, gosh, I gotta get this over with so I can get on to
more
real,
important things.
yes.
Or
But just like when Jesus said, if you gave a cup of cold water in my name,
yes,
then you've offered it to me. And I think of children, the most priceless, precious little treasures. And you are sacrificing yourself for them day after day after day. And that is a sacrifice of love to the Lord. That's an act of worship every single day.
but I think it has to be that conscious choice.
Right.
Yeah.
You have
To
know
remind
that,
yourself,
to choose
because
it.
we are so wired to think this is spiritual and this is not.
Right.
And it's just so hard to rewire our brains.
Well, I used to be like, he'd go off to work and he would
Yes.
do real
Yes,
spiritual.
yes.
Yeah, I mean, like he was leading people to the Lord.
Yes.
And teaching them to be all
Big,
these
important
things, and I was
things.
just wiping noses
Yes.
and
Yeah.
doing
Yeah.
laundry. Yeah.
You know, you
Yep.
mentioned Kathleen Norris, and Pastor Micah turned me on to a book, God in My Everything by Ken Shigematsu. And he quotes her and talks about how do you get into these rhythms, and one of the things he emphasizes, start simple.
Yes.
And I would even say this, stay simple. And he quotes Kathleen Norris in a study done of couples and what were the indicators that produced stable marriages. And one activity made a consistent difference, and it'll surprise you. Some people say, oh, they pray together on a regular basis, or they are sure to go to church. The thing that stood out in her study was the couples who embraced each other in the morning and embraced each other in the evening. It was an indicator of reaffirming their bond, and they had a more stable, healthy marriage. Now, there's nothing big about that except you have to decide, and you have to decide that it's important. So Kris and I like this pattern. Usually it's in the kitchen, and we'll say,
morning.
come here. And the study showed this, didn't matter if you hugged and you're yawning, or if it was romantic, or anything else. And then our pattern in the evening is we're gonna pray and we're gonna kiss before we go to sleep, and invariably we'll say, I love you.
Often not a passionate.
It's most often not,
Yeah.
but you know,
It's like
it-
good night.
Right? Yes.
it's purposely realizing. Someone would say, that's not that important to a marriage. It's utterly important. So everything we do with the motive
Good.
to Jesus,
It's the same thing.
it's the same
Same
thing.
thing.
Same
That's
principle.
so good.
That's so good.
That's so good.
So, you know, if the goal in everything is becoming love, right? Anything we do in this life, whether it's relating to Him or relating to others, is an opportunity, right, to become love. And we're all Benner fans, thanks to you.
Yes,
We're Benner
thank
fans,
y'all.
and so I read this week in the last of the three, Desiring God's Will, where he talks about Jesus picking up the cross at the end of his earthly life. Wasn't just a big moment that he just happened to accomplish, but he had actually been preparing himself to pick up the cross from the very beginning by little crosses he carried all along. And it was just huge to think that even Jesus, the Son of God, if you look back at his life and you look at how many ways that he was humbling himself, how many ways he was choosing to serve others, how many ways he was putting up with difficult people, and just constantly bearing tiny crosses so that one day he could bear a bigger cross. And I think really in our lives, we've got these opportunities every day to become love
Yeah.
through these small acts of, as you
That's so
said,
good.
cold water. Just offering cold water is a statement of that. So, Kris, what would you say as a mom and wife for 30 plus years has shaped you into the image of Jesus? What have you picked up along the way that you'd say these practices have really helped me, given how you're wired and the seasons of life you've been through? What are the things that have worked the best for you?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is being a wife and mother is like a master's class. I wouldn't say suffering.
In suffering.
But in dying
Yeah.
Dying
to yourself.
That's a good way to say it.
Good.
Yeah,
way to
and
say
so
Absolutely.
that ties into the carrying the cross thing,
Yeah.
is, just overcoming my own personal selfishness, and most of that started when Blake was born. I have to get up again.
I know.
Yeah, but choosing humility, trying to teach my children what Christianity looks like, not like what it's supposed to be, polished and shiny, but when I blow it, to say,
Yeah.
you know what, I blew it. That
Yeah.
wasn't loving. And so the practices, meaning like what have I gleaned and how have my practices changed? Or I'm more specific, I don't know, I don't understand the question.
I guess, are there any things that, if as listeners are thinking through their practices, that you'd say, this has been something that has really worked for me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Whether it's your journaling or your walking or whatever it is, like you'd say, this has really helped form me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I think for me, journaling has. I mean, a lot of people, I'm just naturally more introspective. I like time alone.
Yeah.
And so some people aren't like that.
Mm-hmm.
But for me personally, I think journaling got me. It's not like I really don't even reread them that often.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't read most of them over. But I think it helps me process life.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes a way of talking to the Lord of, it brings it out of me, and then I'm like, Lord, what do you think about that? And how am I supposed to think about that? And as I'm writing, it just helps me. I hear.
Yeah.
I process and I hear from the Lord.
So you're writing in His presence,
Yes.
actively. You know that. You're not just writing things, but He's there.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, usually I'll start with, I'll just kind of get my coffee and sit down and be like, but like with less in the morning. Okay, God, here we go, another day. Or sometimes it's, yay, there's sunshine today.
Yeah.
Simple
And
things.
sometimes, okay, Lord, there's no sunshine, but I know it's going to be a good day because you're in it. But when I get my coffee and I have my Bible and my journal and my pen and often a devotional, and it just kind of, I'll process what happened the day before or the night before, and then that morphs into praying for other people or whatever's on my mind, and then I'll read a devotional, and a lot of times it is so crazy how it applies.
It's amazing.
It
It
is.
just,
I know.
yeah. So that's, I'm often reading books that, like the Benner book, and just trying to get those deep truths inside of me.
That's really
I would even say you have a gift of notice, like to notice things. And so all those years when I would come and I'm just in my cloud of motherhood, Micah I remember sending me off, yes, go.
Yes.
Go to Chris's house.
Always come back a better version of yourself. Better. Yeah.
See, you need people in your life. But I remember sitting in your living room, and some of the first things you would talk about is the birds that you would notice outside your window, or something you noticed on a walk, or something you noticed in something you read, or even something in a TV show, whatever it is. Like, both of y'all are actually really good at that. And I think for me, that really helped me in that season to say, wait a second. Sometimes you can get so stuck in your world to not step back for a second and take time to notice, okay, where is God in this? And I think that's a spiritual practice, to step back and be able to breathe for a second and notice what's around you and where is He? Because if He's always with us, and especially I love how that passage in Matthew says, like, it's constantly with, He's with us, so He's in all of it. Sometimes it just takes stepping back and noticing. I think you're really good at that, and it helped me learn to do that in that season. So
I think you're right that the practice. I mean, I would have never put it like that, but it's so good because we have to be intentional in what we're taking in, what we're seeing, intentional in our relationships, intentional about everything. We just so much of the time we're preoccupied and life just happens, and then we're responding to rather than initiating. And I think maybe cancer is what pulled me into being more intentional. And Bailey was 6, so that means Blake would have been 10, and so they were still young enough that me changing as a result of cancer and being more intentional and looking in their eyes when they're talking to me. You know how sometimes, plus you've got 4 and you're like, whoa. And so, but when they're talking, to really listen. And I think that same principle with the Lord is take the time to gaze, to look at Him. You know, you don't physically see Him, but in His creation, in His Word, in the encouragements you hear, from Lifegate or podcasts or whatever, the Lord speaks to us.
I love how she said that. When we keep saying, look into His eyes, I'm sure there are people saying, now do I imagine His eyes? And Shireen, when you read this, it just leapt in Romans chapter 12, verse 1 and following in the Message. And when you read this phrase, I thought, there it is right there. Don't become well adjusted to this culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God.
Yeah.
And so when I look at creation, but my attention's on God, I see Him expressed in
Yes.
creation.
That's good.
When I look at my children, but my attention is on God, because it can be on Him and everything else, I see how much He loves me because of how much I love them. So if you're looking for eyes, you probably won't see them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you pay
Or if you are
attention
them.
and
Yeah.
look for God in the midst, those will be His eyes, so
Yeah.
to speak.
Yeah, that's good. I think it's good for people to be reminded too that spiritual practices aren't always just read your Bible, pray,
No.
listen to worship music. It is things like that, a walk in nature where you're noticing things around you, and I love that. I think it really does should free all of us up.
Yeah, for sure. As
Yeah.
you said earlier, everything's spiritual.
Yeah.
Everything.
And when we
Right.
begin to see that, there's opportunities to see Jesus everywhere.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, like if you're hanging out with friends, and when you were over that other evening, and you heard that bird, and you're like, "Hey, what was that?" You know, just that is you're looking at it in the mindfulness of, after that you're appreciating it more, and you notice things
Yes.
more.
Yeah.
So true.
But it's like we tell our friends those things we like. Today we saw, for real. Last night we saw a bald eagle.
Whoa.
Oh my
over
gosh.
Wow, you've been
Yeah.
talking about that forever. That's so funny.
He was right there.
It
Wow.
was. And so, like, I'm telling you that going, isn't that amazing? God is
Yes.
so cool. This is worship,
Yeah.
right? I mean, this is,
Yeah.
we're being mindful of God. And,
Yes.
and we're
And the
proclaiming it of, can you
little
believe
things.
it?
Yes.
Yeah. It doesn't have
Yeah.
to be thou,
Yes.
or whatever. It's,
Yes. It makes me think of that book, and I think y'all have read it, Liturgy of the Ordinary, which it was another thing that kind of changed for me. I know you saw that in me. And I love how the cover of the book, if anyone gets it, is a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Because I love how she equates that it's really like the food that sustains you all throughout the day, the basics, the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches are really what grow you and shape you, right? Every now and then you get your steak meal that's
Yeah.
like so great, like the bald eagle. Yes!
Yes.
But it's because you took all that time to sit and notice all the things in your backyard that you noticed the bald eagle, and you got to embrace it and enjoy it even more. And I think that's the same for Jesus's the simple steps in his life to really embrace the big things that God has for us. And I think that's what that book helped for me is, okay,
That's
taking
good.
time to notice the small little things in my life.
That
That's
really
what actually
aren't
shape
small
you.
at
They're
all.
not
Yeah.
small. They shape who you are. Like these practices, if you see them as spiritual, they're shaping who you become. And then when you sit down to have that steak meal, you can just enjoy it even more.
It's true.
So, because not every
So
meal is
true.
going to be a steak, let's be honest.
Yeah.
No
Sure.
Way
should
more
it be?
peanut butter and jelly in our
Yeah.
house.
Yeah.
I think a lot of Christians believe this. The primary means of being shaped is study. The study is
Yes.
important.
Yes.
But what we're saying is experiencing the love of God,
Yes.
experiencing the presence of God. We downplay many, many times, but it actually is shaping us.
Yeah.
And being around a person, it influences you. So the Bible says this, don't hang around an angry person. You will learn his ways and become angry. In other words, it's catching. So when you find Jesus in everything, it's influencing everything
Yes.
about you.
well, I mean, we become what we think about.
We
Yes.
become what we think
so
about.
we need to think about the right things. So
Yeah.
we
Yes.
become-
Not just what we study about,
Right.
but what our mind is on all the time.
Yeah,
That's good.
so true. You know, I heard one of my professors at Fuller talked about the idea that in creation you see these rhythms. Obviously, that you see a lot of what y'all are talking about, the birds singing and the plants and the flowers, and it draws you into, when you see those things from a Christian perspective, a biblical perspective, it draws you into the presence of God. And yet now we live kind of in a very urban setting, many of us, and so we lose touch with some of that.
Wow.
And you kind of have to look for it a little bit harder. And so you almost have to search for rhythms because there's street lights on all the time.
Yes.
And because there's TV to watch any time of the day.
That's
and so
good.
kind of in our modern era, we almost have to make more effort to connect with the natural rhythms God created to
Yes.
kind of, as in the language we use this weekend, invite us onto the dance floor.
Yeah.
So good.
And these natural rhythms of being in the Word or journaling or taking walks, noticing the birds, all of those things, they bring us back out onto the dance floor.
That's good.
Other thing I think about being in a more urban type setting is we're around people a little bit more, which can be a hard thing, but also a good thing in many ways. And so I kind of want to wrap our time up with this. Like when we think walking with Jesus, following the ways of Jesus, dancing with Jesus, we often think very much about ourselves and what does that look like in my life. But we all have relationships, and for us as married couples, how have you empowered or enabled one another, enabled in a good way, one another to pursue the presence of Jesus, to be formed into the presence of Jesus in your home and through your relationship? And there's single people that are listening to this too, and it can apply to their friendships, but maybe how have y'all helped each other with the other's practices?
I'll say something that Kris has often wrestled with, and she still could wrestle this week, and that is that she spent time with Jesus in the morning, and she has time where she could spend more time, but she feels guilty. I need to go do this, and she'll tell you very, very often. She'll say, I'm really feeling bad because I have this. I'm reading a little bit further, but I ought to. And I will say all the time, take as much time as you want. All those other things get done, and nothing is ever completely done. The moment it's done, then you start. The laundry's done, and so
It's never done. It's never done.
Right.
helping celebrate and prioritize. And in our marriage, I love this. We never judge each other's rhythms and say, I've noticed you haven't been reading your Bible very often. It's just not a part. Can you imagine that? First of all, we're trying to learn just to receive grace from Jesus, and then from your spouse saying, I noticed you didn't pray during thirst. You just sat there. And that's the worst thing.
Yeah,
and so what I attempt to do, because I think it's very important, is to help cultivate that longing that she has by protecting her from the tendency to be tempted with, I got to produce.
Because I'm very task-oriented.
Yeah.
And so I can think, producing, accomplishing,
Right.
then I have value.
Yes.
When, we know that that's
Yes.
not where we get our value.
Yeah.
And Les has always been, like he just said, he encourages me, and he gives me the freedom and the time. And
It's good. It's good. I noticed with Shireen early on, she referred to it with y'all's group as an extrovert. Me being more introverted, it's the time alone with Jesus. It's the Bible and the journal and the quiet and the stillness and the coffee. But for her, that's important to her. But I realized with y'all's group, that was a huge eye opener for me. She would go to your group. She would come back a completely different person.
Yes.
And here's what was funny is she would say, "Here's what Kris said," and I would say, "That's what I said last week."
Right.
But it didn't matter.
It's just
it's so true. There's something about just being, in the community, releasing yourself into that community, and you're going to hear things differently. You're going to receive things differently.
True.
And so, as strange as that sounds, a significant rhythm in intimacy with Jesus for Shireen is being around other people who are intimate with Jesus.
Yep.
That is
And
so
it took me a
That's
while
so
to
good.
recognize that and to not hold you to those, hey, you're not really doing your quiet time, which early on in our marriage was
We had those conversations.
But recognizing she comes alive when she's in the presence of other people whose hearts are on fire for Jesus, in the same way that I might come alive, opening up Scripture. And so
Wow.
it was a big learning curve for me. But
I think that is super important, because
Yeah,
there
I
are a
do
lot
too.
of people who aren't readers, who aren't intellectual learner,
Yeah.
studious people, and then they're like, then there's not a whole lot of hope for them.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I think the fact that in community you can experience God and
Yeah.
grow is so good.
I know early on for me too, when I came to know the Lord, and then I would always want to go serve, and especially because I went to be a nurse. Now I'm a pastor somehow.
Yes.
But I think I would do all that because that is somewhere that I experienced God, in such an intimate way, when you're serving someone, when you're with someone when they're sick or something like that too. So I think there are people who will find a practice with, connecting with His presence in
Beautiful.
places that are going to be so unique and different for everyone. Some will be in solitude, but then some will be when you're sitting holding someone's hand while they're sick, or when you're bathing your little baby, or when you're talking with a friend over coffee. So I think community as a part of all of it is very, very important.
Yeah,
So
it's great. It's good. Well, and it's good to remember too. I think that we help each other along, and we do that in community. And I know for those of you who are watching, some of you are married, some of you may be single, some of you have roommates, maybe living with your family, siblings. I want to encourage you that our walk with Jesus is not just our own thing, but we walk together in community, and the New Testament makes that really, really clear. So I want to just thank y'all for being with us on this episode. I want to thank y'all for listening, and thanks for joining us on Conversations. I encourage you to share this with people that you love if you think it would help them. And we just want to bless you as you grow to becoming better in Jesus.